Welcome to the Navic Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Navic's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.navic.co. This episode is brought to you by Listo. Listo is an AI-native playtesting platform helping game studios capture unbiased player feedback and convert it into structured, actionable insights. Whether you're validating new features or catching US friction before launch, Listo empowers the entire game team to move faster with clear insights and less guesswork. To learn more and get in touch, visit listo.gg or check out the link in the show notes. And with that, let's jump into the episode.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Navic Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and this is the interview and insight segment. I asked myself while preparing for today's conversation, how many games last a decade, 2 decades? And to name a few, I thought of RuneScape, World of Warcraft, Tibia. League is getting close to 20. It's not been 20 yet. I think it's at like 15, 16, and EVE Online. And then I thought, what qualities do these games all share such that they've survived over 20 years? And what does it take to build a game that outlasts its creators? And to me, personally, it's a few things: player-driven stories, highly social environments, and low-key, just continuing to actually update the game. But today we're going to hear from an expert on building games that outlast creators, and beyond the game's design, what technical choices might need to be made to do so. We are, in fact, going to talk about the longest living of the titles that I've mentioned, EVE Online, and its subsequent chapter currently in development, EVE Frontier. Launched in 2023, EVE was the first major MMO to build its game logic on a relational database, allowing complex economic simulations that it's famous for. By 2025, CCP had cited over 25 million lifetime players and more than $1 billion in lifetime revenue. And today, another chapter, as I mentioned, of EVE is in development. EVE Frontier, a blockchain-powered spinoff built on the SWE network by Miston Labs. SWE's object-centric architecture allows tens of thousands of star systems and player-built structures to exist on-chain, which is very naturally synonymous with the original game's design. I did used to run the crypto segment here at Navic, so beyond discussing the EVE franchise, I look forward to rehashing why the blockchain is the absolute next natural step. With that, I'd like to introduce my guest, Hilmar Petursson, CEO of CCP. Beyond being the board member on several Icelandic game industry and technological development funds and councils, Hilmar might be the easiest bio I've ever had to write because you've been the CEO of CCP for 26 years. And I think that sets a record for the tenure of guests that I've ever had on the show. So welcome. Please feel warmly welcome to the show, and it's good to have you on.
Oh, what an intro. Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you on. And it's amazing. I was like, wow, this is a very simple introduction. There's just 26 years of CCP, which is going to make for an amazing conversation. So folks in the audience, plotting course, today we're going to hit the chapters and history of CCP, why blockchain is the next evolution in the EVE franchise, what happens to the EVE franchise as a macro whole. And Hilmar, given your long tenure in the gaming industry and your legacy, we're going to close with some questions on your perspectives on the state of the current gaming industry today. But first, history and chapters of CCP. I want to start with a brief history, and the way that I broke this up was BS, before Steam, before Steam, then Pearl Abyss, and then the business today. And I'm going to ask you a few questions around each chapter. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I would maybe start on chapter 0, which is an
chapter
interesting.
0.
Yeah. So my first job in games / making 3D on the internet was actually with an Icelandic company called Oz Interactive. So I joined that company in August 96, straight out of university, right? Having finished university. And that company was making the metaverse, one for one, as we saw it in the latest sort of revival of the metaverse, and very much inspired by Snowcrash and Neil Stephenson, etc. We were using VRML, virtual reality modeling language, to create like a UGC platform back in '96. This is almost pre-internet bubble, and that was a very good preparation for what then became CCP. Is that we very specifically kind of figured out that nobody really needed a metaverse, certainly not back then. Maybe in some future they will. I think we could probably time us as 50 years too early on the metaverse. So a few of us kind of step out of that company to create like an unofficial spin-up that is CCP, to do just something simple like making a single shared multiplayer space MMO with the biggest kind of number of players participated in the same simulation. That was like a simplification on the metaverse idea to us. And it's very interesting to see how over time, Evenland kind of exceeded all our wildest dreams about like what the metaverse would be. So the best way to create a metaverse was specifically not to make it and quote unquote just make a game. So with that out there, I think what kind of inspired Team Online was our sort of work on making the metaverse and figuring out without gameplay and basic stuff like inventory and progression, etc. Nobody really has any reason to be in the metaverse. And then a lot of us were playing Ultima Online, which for me was actually, I wouldn't say it was a step down, but there was an interesting experience because mostly I'd been playing MUDs before, which was kind of text-based on mainframe computers, kind of a simulation of a world. And very much has informed everything we have done from MUDs to Metaverse to kind of Ultima Online, coupled with a lot of space franchises. Obviously, Elite, the huge inspiration, sci-fi movies like Blade Runner, Aliens, etc. So out of this kind of big mixture of all the things, we sort of come together, and the first act of the company is to make a family board game in Iceland to seed fund the company. And actually that board game sold 10,000 copies, which is basically one in every 8 homes in Iceland bought a copy of the board game. So in terms of like hitting our core market segment, we have some work to do when it comes to our games on a global scale. But we've set the bar high for market penetration with our board game. That became seed capital to going to make a prototype of Eve Online, where we then raised money in Iceland, actually in April 2000, which for people that pay attention to things is 1 month after the official burst of the internet bubble. But the news just didn't really travel as much back in those days. So the internet bubble was still very much alive throughout the early 2000s. So with that in hand, like all the inspiration, somewhat kind of understanding on how to build virtual worlds, we then spent 3 years of like the craziest crunch I've ever participated in, but almost heard about. And then somehow with what is best described as a miracle, ragtag bunch of people in Iceland, 30 in total, which had never made the game. We just made metaverses before. And we had not even seen a game developer from afar when we should be online. And to its benefit and to its kind of work in progress is the fact that we've been what should I say, patching it up to reach this kind of full form for the past 20 years based on those kind of initial conditions.
Wow. Yeah, and I appreciate this was definitely in the before Steam chapter, because you're talking in 2000s, April, team of 30, you initially built a board game, this ambition to build the metaverse in like 1996 or whatever date you said. And so you launch Eve in 2003, like you said, with this miracle, right? I think you said 30 people. And like I mentioned in the introduction, it was the first MMO to be built on a relational database versus writing to a disk. And I guess, how did you think about this systems design approach that influenced everything from the skill system to the economy? Given that you guys maybe hadn't, like you said, that this was the first game this team had shipped before, perhaps you had no preconceived notions of the way it was supposed to go. But was there any specific thought to that systems design question that was very different from other video games, perhaps at the time?
Yeah. So we decided early on we were not going to have shards or servers. We will call it kind of shards in an MMO sense. So
Mhm.
back then, when you were joining a particular server for Ultima Online, there's even a big backstory in Ultima
Yeah,
Online
definitely.
about like the wizard shard crushing the diamond, and each shard of the diamond is as a copy of the world, kind of very elaborate technical backstory to excuse the fact that there are servers. So we wanted to have everyone play the same game. So everyone on planet Earth will be able to interact with each other if they meet in space, and every story told in this world will be a common story for everyone playing that game. And that had a lot of architecture and game design implications. So one, I mean, we specifically picked a space game because you have to build a lot of space, for lack of a better word, to have like hundreds of thousands of people or millions of people see our game world. And space is, well, easier to make than trees and grass and caves and all those things. Um, and we made like 7,000 solar systems, which were kind of procedurally generated. So you need a big space. Then you need to have a pretty good idea of how you're going to store all the data for all the players at that scale. And because we had more background in metaverse and enterprise software development, it was a fairly intuitive pick for us to just use a database. We did not realize at the time it was a mildly controversial choice. I had to debate other MMO developers at like Austin GBC 2005. I remember being on a panel and being quite perplexed that this was controversial. But it was kind of intuitive. Okay. Millions of people putting their energy into a shared persistent world. You would use something that is the industry standard for persistence, which were databases at the time. Then when everyone is playing the same game, the game becomes a massive social coordination construct. So it is different when you're playing on a maybe small shard with maybe a few thousand people versus you're playing on a universe with hundreds of thousands of people. So we have to come up with bigger problems for the coordination making sense. So this is in part why EVE Online has been so long living. And there's also factors into the choice of space. Like the game is literally on a galactic scale. And the things you can do in the game are of a galactic scale. So when you have like titans to build, which are bigger than cities on planet Earth, and you need like thousands of people to achieve it. I think the first titan was built by 4,000 people over 4 months. You can just imagine the coordination of getting that to happen, like all the logistics of it. Why are people doing it in the first place? So it goes into a lot of this kind of flexible social organization at scale that Harari wrote extremely well about in Sapiens. When I read that book, then it was like, okay, wow, now finally I have words for what was just intuition about. Like the intersubjective reality concept he talks about in that book is very much exercised in EVE Online. You could argue EVE Online is intersubjective reality to being to a point where I sometimes call it an inter-objective reality, because the persistency layer takes it from a fantasy to be a concretely kind of visceral thing or like a real thing. So these were some of the sort of architecture decisions that flowed from the fact you wanted everyone to play the same game. And that is still not really something that people kind of dare even try even today.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think also that's another thing that I pulled out from that is, I mentioned the just updating the game is part of a way to help the game live beyond its initial stasis. But, for you, you kind of mentioned this like element of like power creep. I've watched, in every anime, every season, something needs to escalate. Bigger boss, S plus hero. So I think that's something similar. And you created like from the very beginning, setting it in space, having it be big, right, and colossal, created for those moments where you could basically kind of power creep the game up or make bigger moments that were more impactful to the community at a grander scale. And so I'm curious because now that we're in 2003, you've launched this game. It was a little bit perplexing as to how you decided to host it and how people engage with it, but you did eventually go launch on Steam. When Steam came out in 2008, I think that's around the right time. And I'm curious, what made you decide to launch the game as a box game, and then I think later on you switched to free to play. Walk me through like your kind of psychology, more from the business perspective at that time about what was going on for CCP and why you guys made that decision.
Yeah, so when we are laying down kind of the plan for the game in literally the year 2000, then it was not a realistic option to put something that was kind of CD-ROM sized in terms of megabytes, something that is 600 megabytes, as a download-only option. It just wasn't really feasible on a worldwide scale. So box distribution was still very much a thing. If you look at like Ultima, EverQuest, World of Warcraft, EVE Online, they all came in a box initially. So this element of like you would buy the box would have a CD key. The CD key was 1 month of subscription, was how you took MMOs to market. So we kind of just follow that kind of basic play pattern in 2003. And we had made a deal with Simon and Schuster, which actually had a division for interactive software and computer games. So we had made an arrangement with them to be our publisher and distributor. They actually decided to stop doing games and focus on books, which were, obviously are a big deal, but Amazon was coming online and many sort of new vectors for them to deal with. So they closed down their gaming division while we are publishing the game. So in the middle of that moment, basically sort of leading up, I think it was a few months before our release, they basically closed everything down. So we have this weird situation where we actually don't have the publishing rights to the game. And the game is only available in a box that are already been distributed into channel. So it was 30,000 copies of EVE Online that were lost to the retail channels of the world. So when the game comes out, there is almost like a sort of worldwide scavenger hunt of all the people that have been playing in our beta tests, which was just downloaded, in finding an EVE box with the CD key and scratching it off and sharing it between each other because, I found one in Holland. Hey, I found one in Wisconsin. And then EVE players were just kind of trolling and scavenging, and they found almost all the boxes in the distribution system. But then we had like a 6 months period where we couldn't really offer the game for download until we had come to an arrangement for Simon and Schuster, which they very thankfully gave us the permission to offer the game as a digital download. So we, in a way, became sort of end of 2003, the first game, again, to be only digital download and no post distribution. And that was quite unheard of. Then we did little hacks like we offered a 3-day trial without giving your credit card information ahead of time, all sorts of these kind of things, which we experimented with on the go-to-market front.
Interesting.
Then we actually did get an email from the young upstart of Steam, or of Valve with Steam in 2006. We still have that email. A reach out from somebody at Valve on introducing Steam to us. Of course, I used Steam playing Half-Life and all that. And I think we did become the first multiplayer game not made by Valve on Steam. I think initially they focused on just single player games. I think we were one of the first multiplayer games to join Steam. And I think you're probably right on 2008. I think we got the email in 2006, and it probably took us a couple of years to work it out because it was a bit orthodox with a subscription model. How does that work on Steam? And I had many fun meetings over at Valve about that, where we again came to a pretty good solution, which I think is still the solution we have for every kind of subscription game on Steam.
Got it. And so you mentioned like a couple partners, right? And that I think brings me to kind of this third chapter, right? So Steam is a partner. Simon & Schuster, the publisher, who's now in books. And then in 2018, I believe Pearl Abyss, you do an acquisition for about $425 million. What were you guys thinking at the time? And actually looking back, given today, how would you think about this deal right now in 2025?
So obviously, by 2018, when we joined with Pearl Abyss, CCP has been in operation for over 20 years. And to get the game initially funded, I mean, it wasn't just the seed capital from the board game. We had raised money in 2000 from mainly Icelandic investors. We had more sort of international investors join us in 2005, which was mostly kind of secondary share sales from the initial Icelandic investor cohort to investors. I mean, one of them was a US company called Catalyst, which have actually done quite well for themselves since then, but they were a bit of the first East Coast VC kind of vibe back then. So we had kind of done secondary kind of not capitalized the company, but kind of re-engineered the cap table once. And of course, there is the natural thing of like some point you provide an exit. So when we joined up with Pearl Abyss, it actually was a process which we ran with the investment back Rain, talked to like a lot of different options on that front, and Pearl Abyss definitely came out on top. And it was very much driven by the fact that, if we're not an IPO company at some point, investment horizons and all that are getting to a place where it makes sense. So that was kind of the thinking of doing that. Pearl Abyss are an extremely inspiring company. They had, of course, made an MMO called Black Desert, which in many ways has way more similarities with EVE Online than people think on the surface of it. Obviously, Black Desert is an extremely cool sort of action RPG kind of like fantasy game, and EVE Online is a space game. But if you have ever tried to make beer in Black Desert, you understand how I make the analogy of like the level of complexity, the level of hardcoreness of both. There was a lot of alignment. So we've had a great time with Pearl Abyss on just more sharing the tricks and trades of how you make an MMO in Korea, how you make an MMO in Iceland, 4 places. So that has been a very productive relationship on kind of, it feels like more sort of 2 game makers honing their craft by kind of sharing knowledge and perspective from our very different corners of the world, while still kind of banding together in this passion for online games and games overall. Obviously, there are upcoming games, Crimson Desert, who is, a tour de force of open world fantasy games, unlike almost like a Grand Theft Auto level scale, is actually a single player game, which is also very interesting in the state of games overall, which we can cover later.
Yeah. Okay. And that sort of brings us to, that's 2018 to sort of today, right? And before we move on to EVE Frontier, want to ask a couple questions about like snapshot of EVE Online today. Sort of, what's the average age of an EVE player today? What is the what does revenue streams look like for you today? And I'd also be curious, because you guys have been building kind of this relational database model where you're tracking so many pieces of the economy. I'd be curious if you could name like the top like 5 KPIs that you guys track. And I bet they differ from standard live ops games. So those, I think, are the questions. Average age of an EVE Online player. What does the business look like today? And top 5 KPIs that you guys track.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. When we shipped EVE Online, the average age of CCP employees was 27.
Mm-hmm.
And the average age of EVE Online players was 27.
Mm-hmm.
And that initial cohort, we joined us in the year 2003 with a scavenger hunt for the boxes and all those kind of fun things, has in many ways very much stayed with us ever since. So the core audience has almost aged with the game. So over time, the average age of the overall EVE player base is kind of anchored with the initial cohort that then kind of in a way retains forever. So of course we then add new people. It's a bit counterintuitive to other MMO makers I compare notes with, that we do have about 500,000 people that play EVE for the first time every single year. So we actually do not have as big of a challenge in people joining the game. We do have an ongoing struggle on how to onboard people into EVE. There are many famous memes on the internet with the learning curve of EVE Online. And as the game has grown in content and complexity and kind of legendariness, that learning curve is not getting any easier. We have become smarter over time, and we have had to learn a lot on that front, on how to onboard people more effectively. So I think actually today is the best time to join EVE Online. We've introduced various people to connect new players and veteran players together in a productive way, which I think is becoming the best way. So if I were to now take the median age, it actually isn't quite my median age. I'm now 52. It's a bit lower. I think I recall a number like 38 years old would be the median age. It's actually not something we track very much. We are not so much obsessing about that. What I find very inspiring, that often we have quite young people make it to the upper echelons of EVE Online. Actually, we have a democratically elected council called the Council of Stellar Management that comes to Iceland every year at the start of the year and spends a week at CCP headquarters debating with our game designers, so with myself, about like the comings and going in EVE Online. And I make an effort to always join up and be kind of with them in that experience. And there were 2 people on the CSM in their early 20s this year. So to make it in your early 20s to the, highest echelons of EVE Online, be elected by the player base onto the Council of Stellar Management, which only has, I think, 9 seats, is quite the achievement. And in both cases, those people had started playing EVE Online. One was 12-year-old and the other one was something like 16, I think. So I found that inspiring, that people are still joining EVE Online in their kind of mid-teens and joining to the top of the game. So that kind of fights against the median age just growing out as the decades pile on.
Sure. And yeah, we'll talk about this a little bit more in the EVE franchise. And I have some parallels with I was at Blizzard when we launched WoW Classic, and some analogs about like how you're thinking about players as relation to the game living forever, but we'll get there in a second. But the other question was about what are like the 5 KPIs that you guys track? And then we'll move on to talking about EVE Frontier.
So, to your point earlier, we used to track a lot transactions per second because we were using Microsoft SQL Server, and we were by far the highest TPS application on SQL Server when we come out. SQL Server was kind of just having its early steps into the world of basically competing with Oracle. And because we couldn't afford Oracle, we picked Microsoft SQL Server. And we were banging that rapidly with transactions per second. We were even getting like bleeding edge builds from the SQL Server team to patch up some issues we had with bugs and bottlenecks in the game, because we were really testing it. So I mean, for scale, which obviously isn't a lot today, but we're doing about 10,000 transactions per second, which it's still a respectable number today, but it was borderline science fiction back when we released the game. And we actually didn't really find a good way to address it until I found a company in the US called Texas Memory System, located in Houston. And they had invented something called the RAM SAN. So it basically was like a solid disk drive, but using not like solid state memory, but just normal random access memory, as you make in computers, but operated with battery sort of reserve power. And they were using this in the oil industry in Texas. And we needed to get some like special military equipment export license to get the RAM-SAN out of the US, tend to our long-term data center. And once we had the RAM-SAN, our sort of TPS problem kind of went away. So we've been kind of fine on that front since then. But that did take a while to figure out. Then there's another kind of technical parameters which we watch how bad it becomes, because what also happened over time with the coordination at scale, sort of what EVE begs for, is that EVE players started to one-up themselves in how many people they could pile into one massive fleet fight, as it's called in EVE. So two sides are fighting over something. Sometimes it was a little bit unclear, other than just to break with the record, but now we have made various sort of victory criteria, etc., that become the point of it. And we have set a Guinness World Record for the largest game fight quite often. I think it's now sits just over 8,000 people, kind of in an all-out brawl inside kind of a pretty epic spaceship soup. I would encourage anyone to check out the video clips of it. It's something to behold. And this both became a major problem for our servers, but also for the experience. 8,000 people, 4,000 on each side, calling shots and things like that. It's very hard to make happen in runtime. So we came up with this concept of time dilation, inspired, of course, by time dilation in physics, in our own reality. So when these kind of large speed fight happens, the time dilates, so it becomes like bullet time, which both helps the sequencing of the state transitions, but also gives people a bit of a different pace to call the shots. We've kind of had unlocks over the period of time in kind of raising the ceiling on how big these can become. But it is always a bit of a nail-biting moment when people are close to setting a new record on just how will the servers uphold. There's been a mixture of hardware and software innovations to make this possible, etc. But then we also focus a lot on just like DAU, which for EVE is probably more like weekly active than daily active. Obviously, day 1 retention, day 7 retention, day 30 retention, focus a lot on that. Of course, we, like any company, look at ARPU, LTV, those kind of things. We very much focus on people flying their spaceships in space. Often the game can be played, sort of, you can be in a station, which is kind of a safe haven, and you're kind of chatting with your friends, or spinning your spaceship, which is an oddly comforting and endearing thing to do, spaceship spinning. But we want you to be in space, because the game is ultimately a game of kind of players versus players, kind of space survival. So how many people are flying in space is another KPI we focus on.
Very cool. Yeah, so some standard ones and certainly some very special ones. I love the transactions per section, per second, and I think it's important to kind of like understand from the there's obviously business KPIs, but then there's also gameplay insights and sort of like what are people doing and how that could inform business insights. So I think that's very very cool. All right, so that brings us to
in our headquarters in Iceland. We have like a pretty cool solar system map that shows every death in real time into our canteen. So when we're having food, we are watching kind of murder and mayhem in real time happening in the Inuitan solar system.
That's awesome. Okay, so that kind of fully wraps us up to current day. We're going to talk a little bit about the relationship between EVE Online and EVE Frontier in the second section. In the section after this one. But I want to sort of talk a little bit about EVE Frontier. And just a reminder for the audience, EVE Frontier is basically a version of EVE that's going to be built on the blockchain. And Hilmar, like I wanted to ask you sort of when you started thinking about the blockchain, just in general. You'd already successfully built a game on the database, the SQL server, as you mentioned. And why were you even thinking about building a game on the blockchain? And like when in time did you start thinking about it?
So the first time I started thinking about it for reals is that, it maybe starts a little bit earlier. So I think it is about 2009. I have the receipt in terms of an email. I start to make this logo for EVE, which has the infinity symbol in it, and I start to think about like, okay, 2009, the game's been running for like 6 years, which felt like forever to me. In my kind of shipping it 27, and like your horizon is maybe 5 years. I recall our wildest ideas for EVE Online was it was going to go on for 5 years. That was our wildest like Excel model was like we're going to peak at 150,000 subscribers and then we're going to taper out for 5 years. And that was the extent of our imagination. I mean, really honest. I mean, we had some vague ideas that maybe that was just to put it in a box that fit into Excel, but it was just unprecedented that a game would go on for decades. It was just, I mean, sure, like some single player games did exist. I mean, people are even playing the original Elite today. I could probably find one DAU just today, somewhere in that. But this idea, like a virtual world, was going on for decades, was just... it broke the imagination. But there in 2009, I was like, this could just go on forever. We'll make this logo. We start to talk about EVE Online forever as the vision for the game, etc. But then in 2015, somebody explains to me how you could store other things than the value of Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain. So the Bitcoin protocol actually is quite flexible. The Lightning network is implemented on top of the fact you can interpret unspec outputs for many different things. And there were even games using that as persistency layer for games. And somebody was explaining this to me and I was like, this is interesting. Maybe this idea might play a part in the foreverness. Maybe Bitcoin blockchain could be like cold storage for EVE Online spaceship, and I was thinking some like wormhole mechanics of like you could send your spaceship to cold storage by opening up a wormhole, and then you could take it out of like I was having just sort of fantasies about this in the context of forever. Like, I mean, forever. Like, if you truly want to go forever, then like the weirdest things become issues, like the fact we have a database somewhere in the Docklands area, and if that goes away, sure, we have backups and all that. But I mean, the company might be a risk factor because companies don't last forever. I mean, not everyone is like Nintendo has been making some kind of games for over 200 years. So this kind of stack of like foreverness, and very much obviously Bitcoin was kind of touted us through decentralization and fault tolerance. It's unstoppable, which I think, to a large extent has still held up true. And they come up with a good kind of quantum safe upgrade to it at some point. It's hard to really see how it's ever going to stop. So that's where kind of first, okay, then I take a look at it and it was like, okay, it's very esoteric. This might not be a thing to be actually doing. But that was a bit of a seed that kind of got stuck in my brain. Then when Ethereum comes out with smart contracts, then it was just, okay, interesting. Like Ethereum in a way, if Bitcoin is like a database, Ethereum is kind of like a computer, and it's kind of like at the time like a very little Raspberry Pi level of like TPS that the whole world is sharing one Raspberry Pi. But it's kind of an interesting concept, especially with the smart contracts. And what I came to appreciate is that smart contracts on Ethereum are a piece of software that lives in an economically adverse environment. Like it's economic warfare between different applications on Ethereum implemented as smart contracts. And that layer has largely held up. You kind of gloss over Amiibi and stuff like that. And that was like, okay, this could maybe become a modding platform where, and at the time and still today, we have like an API gateway where thousands of people have been writing kind of companion software in the form of websites and all sorts of applications for EVE Online. But we're very hesitant to allow that to write into the world state. It's largely just reading back from the world state. We can allow it to write into the world states because we're using a database, but it is something you have to deeply think of ahead of time. And I was like, okay, maybe this foreverness in the decentralization idea, maybe the smart contracts can become a modding platform. And then obviously, it was like every MMO, I'm sure you experienced this when you were working on Blizzard, has real money trading happening, whether we like it. And of course, on EVE, we fight it in our UI, it's not allowed. We chase people down that are doing it. It never really felt like a good solution to be fighting your core customer base. But just like the kind of moddability, writing into the world state, and real money trading, and the things having actual value, these are very challenging things to retrofit into a 20-year-old game because people have expected a certain thing. It's technically complicated. It's legally complicated. So I, at that point, started to think about, okay, if we were to make another game, like now, 20 years later, do we have enough of a foundation to warrant its existence? So if we combine this kind of decentralization, smart contracts as modding, and real money trading, just kind of using mainly the legal framework around blockchains in the context of a game. It's actually less of a technical thing than a legal thing. Technical helps a bit on interop, but it's mainly the legal framing, like cryptocurrencies and blockchains are another chapter of the law than virtual items in a game.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have like a long kind of list of like all the things, if I had the time machine written, tattooed on my metaphorical arm of like, if I have the time machine, what do I go and do different on kind of various mechanisms in the game? And 20 years into it, it did feel like, okay, maybe this warrants making what I think about like a new city. I very much think of EVE Online like a city. Often kind of thought about the metaphor of what is it really? I'm a CEO of a company that takes care of EVE Online. What am I really? Am I president? Am I like, what am I? And a mayor of a city always felt very, very apt because what people tend to obsess about are all the little things about living in a virtual world. Like just like you do in a city. I'm now in London, was taking the subway this morning and it was late and there was cancelled line, and like there was a crowd that was late for a meeting. Like, this is my experience of the city of London. But it's great when the subways are on time, when it's not. Like, and I become angry at the mayor in some metaphor of like,
Yeah,
why can't you have the trains run on time? And this is very much the experience and the energy we feel from youth players. Like
I see.
they care mostly. I mean, they care about the big things, but mostly, like viscerally, the actual
The things that impact their everyday life. Yeah,
is the quality of life of playing the game, and that not being frustrating, and that maybe being addressed if it is frustrating. So anyway, it's a city. Then I started to think about, okay, if EVE Online is Rome, then okay, a new city would be like New York, and I like using that as an analogy because, I mean, New York feels like an Italian city a little bit to me, like, and I think some of the founding cohorts were Italians. So thinking about it like that, okay, now we have new building materials, we're building skyscrapers and elevators and all that, but Rome is still awesome with a Colosseum and like many amazing things, the best concrete ever, like an amazing place. And these cities coexist in our world, and they're separate, they're different, and the overall world is more rich because they both exist. So while, I mean, as soon as we ship EVE Online, people are coming to us. So when is EVE 2 coming out? And we very much resisted that idea. And it doesn't really feel like that to us. I mean, we were also very inspired by WoW Classic, as we were referencing. Like WoW Classic became like a way to tap into a certain type of feeling again for
yeah, absolutely.
our customer base. And the nostalgia cohort for World of Warcraft is very big due to the way that EVE rolled out with the boxes and the 30,000 copies and all that. The nostalgia cohort for OG EVE Online is a little different. But the nostalgia of exploring a new world with new mechanics and all that does, when I play Frontier, it tickles my nostalgia in the way of like, I don't really know what's going on. And even if I'm very much involved in making that game, I don't really know what's going on. It's all procedurally generated. Like, it's 100,000 solar systems. There are 3 black holes in the sector, wrecking chaos all over the place. Obviously, all the mods and things that people are doing make the game even wilder. So it becomes a little bit like the original moment of discovering a new world for EVE, played again, kind of 20 some years later.
Yeah. So it sounds like basically, and this was going to be a question for later on, but you're not going to shut down EVE Online and
Oh
move
my
to
God,
EVE Frontier.
no.
It's Rome and it's New York, and I think it's very similar to the Blizzard pattern. I think for when we launched WoW Classic, there's a lot of questions about, are we going to merge this back? Are we going to just go to, or after Classic, do we go to Mists? Like, are we going to keep going in living the same history over and over again? But it sounds like so that these are going to be mutual communities. And of course, I have questions about cannibalization and migration between the two cities, perhaps that might impact cannibalization. But I still kind of want to address, you investigated Bitcoin, right? You investigated Ethereum. And you've recently made the public announcement that you'll be building on SWI. And a lot of the premise of this is to obviously build first a sophisticated open trading economy, right? To kind of, I guess, give the players what they were doing anyway, which was real money trading. That's one of the reasons. The second reason is to avoid, I guess, reliance on your own servers and something that could potentially live forever past the dissolution of the company, or let's just say like you said in our kickoff, a meteor hits Iceland, kind of setup. But are you not concerned that even though the blockchain is less centralized, there are still centralized rules that, a protocol chooses to elect towards? There's a reason why you chose SWI over Ethereum. And how do you guys think about that? Do you think about that as like another dependency? And do you think that you'll be able to build a business on a fully on-chain game that you think is going to be sustainable? Because you talked a lot about, what does this warrant the investment?
Yeah. So not only warrant the investment, does it have permission to exist? Because like for Frontier to coexist with EVE Online, like it is living with a rather legendary older sibling, so to speak.
Right.
It is quite a thing to hold a small candle to EVE Online. So, we have to think deeply about it. Why does it really warrant to exist? And I think, there are several like technical and technocratic elements that I mentioned. But I think one of the things that immediately came to mind is this genre of survival games that it is similar to MMOs, but it's a very different feeling that when you play a survival game. So we very much wanted to kind of explore this feeling of survival. EVE Online is like a space opera. Like it's a massive, bustling world with trillions of people. It's very much kind of, because I think the best sci-fi sort of analogy is the Hyperion Cantos. It's an extremely good science fiction book written in the very late 80s. Boggles the mind that somebody could, or Trans Simmons could write it in, I think, 89. And it very much describes this kind of cultured, bustling world. And EVE Online is that. Of course, with a seedy, dark underbelly and all the spectrum of kind of civilization, but it is a very civilized world. Whereas in Frontier, we are living in a space apocalyptic broken world. Like it's a world that takes place, or it's a premise that takes place around 3 black holes locked in a kind of a 3-body dark kind of macabre, and that there are chaos around it. So, but people want to be there to mine the riches. You can get out of the rifts of space happen around those 3 black holes, but it is very much a colony that is always being ruined. So when you play Frontier, you are in a post-apocalyptic kind of Mad Maxy survival feeling. It is not a bustling metropolis. You are like, again, taking New York as an example, I think about like 3 Daniel Day-Lewis movies. You can be in The Last Mohican, you can be in There Will Be Blood, or you can be in Gangs of New York. And you're somewhere between Last Mohican and There Will Be Blood. Think about like when he's digging up the tar in the well and the bucket and bean fall on him and he breaks his leg and he's like crawling out of the well with like blood and oil and he's like clipping back to town. That's the feeling we're going for. And then, eventually I predict it will move more into Gangs of New York. But we're very much taking it all the way there. You're in the beginning, and it's very much about the harshness of space, the evilness of the entropy of space, and it's very much it's a world that is grinding you down. It's hostile and it's evil and it's angry. This is like the sort of brand logo or like the Steam logo, Frontier. It's always kind of like this is the feeling we're going on. The actual game logo is a little more sort of EVE Online inspired, but this is what you put on the t-shirts. And this is the contrast. Like it's an evil world that wants to kill you, and everyone there wants to kill you. If the world wasn't crazy enough and all the machine life that live there, then the other people certainly are going to kill you. So it's a very angry and evil game. And you could say, Hilmar, what the fuck? Like, wasn't EVE Online hardcore enough? No.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Enough. That is our analysis. EVE Online just wasn't hardcore enough. But again, in our madness of forever, if that, like, there is this element of the world needs to present the problem. The world is a problem statement that we want to have endure forever, because in what you were challenging me on, aren't there several points of centralization and things that challenge that for sure? And probably the biggest challenge, especially when the world becomes autonomous, when all of us disappear and the world is autonomous, which will take decades, by the way. but we need to imbue it with a problem statement, kind of like our own world, which seems stupidly big. I mean, if you look at the play space of our universe, it's like, it boggles the mind. Like, who designed this? This is a little too much. Like, dude, like, where were you going for? Like, there's no way we will solve the galaxies of galaxies and the universe of universe that we live in. And we haven't gone quite there yet. But we've taken a good whack at it. What is a game that will puzzle an audience for decades and centuries to come?
And the blockchain, I guess, is a part of that hardcoreness for you.
So the blockchain is more about the modability. It's more about the legal framework for true player ownership. Decentralization plays a part into the foreverness. I mean, this element that we, the creator, can enshrine things onto the blockchain where it is mutable and we can't change it after a point in time. In the beginning, we will probably have like kind of keys to go and modify, but eventually we will throw the keys away and certain parts of the world state become immutable. We've developed a framework we call digital physics, where over time we can solidify layers upon layers of the game, and that becomes immutable, and people can still build new features on top of it. We're also going to make it all open source. So again, in this disaster scenario, as we were talking about, if a meteor hits Iceland or one of its many volcanoes blows up, which is probably more probable, then all the things should be there for Eve to live on past an extinction event. Like
that. And I think there's definitely something beautiful to that. I mean, when you pin Eve Frontier as a mirror of our world, right? Like, you can't change history. Like, JFK was assassinated. It is immutable, right? Like, this thing happened in the past. It was immutable. Whereas obviously in a lot of video games, you're like, we launched this character and it was doing way too much damage. So now we'll go back and we'll change it and we'll recorrect the future, right? As a better way for the world to make it a better environment. But I think that there's something obviously hardcore about things becoming immutable in the game, and we don't change the past and we just move on and we play in this world that we've created for ourselves. But I do have kind of a question, and before we talk a little bit about also the speed of development between the two games, and then we'll kind of go into our closing questions about the gaming industry. But you just mentioned, what the fuck? Eve is notorious for its steep learning curve and hardcore community. This is even more hardcore, perhaps. And your resolution was that Eve Online wasn't hardcore enough, and we need to make something even more hardcore. But I guess a question to you is that if you want the game to live forever, you probably need to build a new generation of fans. And we spoke early on in the beginning that people find it challenging to onboard into EVE Online. Do you have this fear that perhaps the only people that will play Frontier are the people who played online, and then you're actually diminishing the population of the people that are fans? And then how is the world going to live forever if you don't have a robust number of CCU playing all the time, and because the game is so hard to get into? How do you guys think about that?
Yeah, so there are several ways to think about that. Like, one is the ensemble I mentioned earlier. We have people in their early 20s on our console of stellar management. So people are definitely joining EVE Online on year 20, turning 23 now, next May. Mm-hmm. So I mean, that is out there. Then I take inspiration from things which are extremely hard, but have been adopted into the mainstream over time. Mm-hmm. One example is running a marathon. So the first person that runs a marathon literally dies from it. Like, running from marathon.
I was just talking about this the other day with my friends. Yeah. About how strange the marathon is.
Exactly.
Like,
and he was running to Rome, which is apt in this context of like running from marathon to Rome to make known that an invasion was coming, and dies. Then, like today, it would not be an unreasonable thing for my mom to run a marathon. I mean, people in their 70s and 80s are finishing marathons. And they never made the marathon shorter. But there is something that happened in the world that through training, social organization, normalization, etc., it became a reasonable thing for a grandma to finish a marathon. And went from first person trying, dying, 2,000 years later, everyone is doing it. And then, okay, now marathons have been normalized completely. And there's a huge one here in London that is oversubscribed, and you need like lotteries and whatever to get a ticket. So millions of people all over the planet run marathons. They run multiple marathons per year. So then, okay, marathons are obviously not hard enough. Then people came up with Ironman. So the marathon is just a cherry on top of the swimming and the biking. And okay, that wasn't enough. Now people do like 500 miles running in the desert somewhere, where you're like, have to sleep while you're running and God knows what. Like, we just have this tendency of taking something extremely hardcore to the point of dying in the first beta test, to the point of normalizing, and then making it harder and harder and harder. And I think people will be running marathons forever. So that's one. Then I'm very inspired by the game of chess, having like a mega moment in the world today, like chess.com. I don't know, it's like 100 million MAU or something. It is.
I've had the CEO actually of chess.com on our show.
Amazing. Whatever those peeps are doing, I wanna repeat some of that. Like in the 4,000 years of chess and in the 4,000 years of EVE Online, I for sure EVE Online hope that EVE Online can take from chess and have its biggest day in the sun 4,000 years from now, like chess has. And again, I never make chess easier. Like, there have been like little tweaks, like fish around them and things like that, but mostly, the game is the same game people have been playing for 4,000 years. Chess.com did a really good job on kind of matchmaking and leaderboards and like all these kind of things and kind of making it accessible for people. So I think we see this time and time again. People take something hardcore and obscure. This t-shirt is a little bit sort of Norwegian death metal inspired. That used to be an absolute niche obscure thing, and maybe the Norwegian death metal version of metal is still a bit out there. But my God, metal has been taking mainstream to no end. Metallica was the biggest touring band in the world for a good amount of time. And fashion trends were and still are kind of heavy metal even today. So we're just not afraid of this concept of, even if it looks like super weird and hardcore today, it might not be that when it diffuses into mainstream, like marathon, chess, and Norwegian death metal.
Interesting. Okay. So I think that's where it is. You have this belief, your assumption case is that people gravitate towards that over time rather than like perceiving the world as static. Because I think we could probably talk about this for forever, but I'm going to get to our last questions. For myself, there's a culling, right? As you graduate from marathon to Ironman to super Ironman, where the population gets diminishingly smaller, right? And I guess my core question would be like, can eFrontier, if the parallel is the top 500 people who decide that Ironman isn't enough for them and they need to run super Ironman, how can you make sure that there's enough people in that world to make sure it's populous enough that it's like the game doesn't, many games die, they have 3,000 CCU and they die on the vine. That's sort of, I think we could probably talk that out for a while, but
yeah. So I have actually never run a marathon, but I've done half an Ironman twice. And when I did it in its time, oh my God, the cities they took place in were like packed with people. When I went and did it, there was a posse of people coming with us. And I don't know how much I paid to the entry fee for the organization of Ironman. And that whole ecosystem is massive. Like, it's massive. And it continues to grow to a point where it's somewhat problematic. Like the places where they run these tournaments are packed. Like, there isn't enough play space in the world to run all these Ironman contests to meet the demand for Ironman. and they're still kind of early in their marathon journey. So like, don't knock that out. The culling doesn't necessarily work how you think it works. Like there are 8 billion people you're culling from. You're not culling from one cohort over to another. So I'm just not really a big believer that we are subdividing. I think we're doing something different. Rome will be Rome, New York will be New York, and people pick their city based on kind of what they like, or they might even switch, do a bit of
both.
Yeah, do a bit of both. And then I was thinking, which would you summer in? Like probably Rome. I don't know. I would only expect. Well, I mean, I've been in New York in all seasons. It kind of has the vibe in all seasons.
It does. It does have a vibe. As someone who lives in New York, it has a vibe in all seasons, of course. But okay. Yeah, I'm sure that we could talk this out forever. I love this analogy. One quick question before we move on to some final questions about the gaming industry. How many, in terms of team, right? Like you launch EVE with 30 people. How big is CCP today, and who is working on EVE Online and who is working on EVE Frontier if you just had to split the team?
So
or everybody's working on both?
Yeah, CCP overall is 400 people. So, I mean, the dev team on EVE Online is about 100 people. We have like a core development team, which is like 20 or 30. We have customer support, publishing, which split their time a little bit. It tends to be more on the publishing side, but we keep the teams very separate. So the core Frontier team is 50 people, so kind of half the team, a little bit bigger than the initial EVE development team, but we wanted to keep it pretty lean. It's when you're discovering a new thing, it is not something you scale out the gate. I mean, EVE Online can have 100 developers work on the game. I mean, there's a lot of process. There's a lot of like organic understanding of what EVE Online is and what it needs. And we have a lot of engagement with the community, such as the CSM and our various ways to kind of source where we need to focus on in EVE. So we can have more developers on EVE. Yeah, we have 50 people. The core development team probably works more on Frontier right now because it's a way to push our core technology, which we then can backport into EVE. For example, EVE still runs on Python 2.7, or it's called the stackless version of Python. It's a very special version of Python, but for EVE Frontier, we bit the bullet and upgraded to Python 3.12, I think we're on right now. So we've done these kind of things which are hard to do in the live environment of EVE. We've kind of spiked with Frontier, proven it out. I think we will backport it, which you can almost kind of think in my New York Rome analogy for sure. I mean, it didn't put like skyscrapers on the Colosseum, but now that New York exists, all cities of the world take inspiration from the fact that it does exist, and you think differently about what the city is because of you have both to pull ideas from. So yeah, that's the rough split. Then here where I am in London, we have about 17 people working on a shooter, which we are kind of creating a very innovative thing. It's called EVE Vanguard. We're actually merging EVE Online and EVE Vanguard into one kind of platform using the play space of EVE Online. It's basically a game that takes place on a planet on EVE Online. So it's another way to kind of break the paradigm a little bit of what a game can be. Now we have kind of two games sharing an environment in with EVE Online and EVE Vanguard sharing an economy. So, I mean, we're doing all sorts of crazy things.
Got it. Okay, very cool. All right, so we're going to close with some questions about the gaming industry, probably about two, just given that we're short on time. But my first question is, you guys have done this tremendous job of retaining this insane community for like over 2 decades at this point. And there's this, in the past 5 to 10 years or so, there's been a new development in nascent community building philosophy, right? Build in public, build alongside your community. What do you think today's modern day developers should learn from Eve's social design, and how does that impact the way they should do development today, which might be different than they had done AAA or AA in the past 20 years?
Well, I mean, EVE Online was always kind of built in public. The out the gate, we were, so we have like an alpha test of EVE Online in like 2001. We've been doing it for 1 year. And immediately as we saw that, like the alpha test feedback, actually we just had people in Iceland in the alpha test, and they just came to our office to give feedback. It was a very, in hindsight, smart way to do it. Even if, well, I mean, it was kind of out of necessity. The internet wasn't like super proliferated. And then we did a fairly long kind of beta test. We ran a beta test from like January 2003 till May when it comes out. That was a long beta test back then. And then, I mean, the game has kind of been building in the open in a kind of an extreme sport way ever since. So I think in many ways, the world has kind of been adopting our playbook more than anything else. For sure, we've learned many different things from game industry overall, but it feels like people are more or less sort of catching up to that way of building things. And I guess now with the extreme opinionated, feedback-driven nature of the internet, any game is kind of building in the open, whether they like it or not. Like you even see, I mean, one of my favorite games in recent times is Elden Ring. And when you play Elden Ring, it is like, okay, this game is obviously designed for the construct where the internet exists, because some of the obscurity in this game can only be explained by some people going like way deeper than I will ever have time for. I will not get all the references from all the inspiration that From Software has taken to make this game happen. But man, do I appreciate people to lay all that lore in some YouTube videos on, and all the little obscure things you can do. And kind of, I mean, sometimes when I'm playing a game, like following all these quest lines, they're so obscure and kind of hard to follow, which I kind of like. I mean, I kind of like the fact that it doesn't have an instruction manual and it doesn't have like endless question marks on the map, whatever. But sometimes I dabble in just, okay, catch me up here. What's really going on?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's an example of nobody would make a game like that unless the internet existed. Like you have to make the game so enigmatic so that a group of people can figure out the game together, and with their async mechanic of like hits and all that, and the fact that it's all on YouTube and Reddit and whatever, is kind of like a construct of you need to make the game harder because the internet exists. So I think everyone is kind of building in the open. So whether you acknowledge it or not, you are.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And then last question is, if you had to summarize the current state of the gaming industry in one or two sentences, how would you do that? And what is the biggest change the game industry is about to face that game developers need to be ready for, but they are not?
So I think there are two vectors going on in gaming right now. There are games which are highly retentive, like an EVE Online, but obviously the bigger ones are Minecraft, Roblox, and Fortnite. They've been coined the black hole games, which I would call EVE Online the OG black hole game. The others are bigger, I give them that. These young upstarts. So that's one. Then we have a discovery problem in games. Like there are hundreds of thousands of mobile games released every year. Last year, 18,000 games were released on Steam. I think the study is there's $100 listing fee on Steam. And I think it's only a few hundred games out of those 18,000 games that made back the listing fee. So well done, Valve, on having a listing fee. But the discovery is broken. Like neither mobile platforms nor Steam are built for this scenario where tens of thousands of games are being released every year. Some of it is various type of, I'm going to go out on a limb and call it slop. Obviously not all 18,000 games, but some ratio of them were human-created slop. We are now entering an era where human-created, AI-assisted manufacturing on games will reach some epic proportion, and that will make the discovery problem even more challenging. So, and I think the discovery problem is maybe a meta concept of fighting for attention. So I think our attentions as humans living on planet Earth in 2025, there are high demands on our attention. I think we can all relate. I mean, it's the news cycle, it's all the social media, it's all the amazing games in my Steam library I will never have time to play. It's my own life, it's my family, it's my job. It's a lot. So I think we are just in a very, very challenging time of cutting through when it comes to attention and discovery, and it ain't getting easier. So I think games are affected by this, but so is all form of media. So we feel it now, both on, frankly, on all our games. What used to be a playbook for getting people's attention to join something new is out the window. Like we're off the map. You need to reinvent everything.
Really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with everything you said. And it's a really hard problem to find a solution to, given the state of distribution, given its consolidation around two stores on the PC market, 2 stores in the mobile market, 2 consoles, and it's a really big challenge. And I think I agree. There's just an oversaturation of games, and in an oversaturated world, how do you make sure that your thing is the thing that gets seen? And it's not easy. But anyway, we are well over time. Hilmar, this was so enjoyable. I bet I could probably go back and forth with you for hours more. I think what you guys are doing with eFrontier and the blockchain is so interesting. And thank you so much for coming on and talking with me about the history of CCP and where you guys are going next. It was such a pleasure.
Yes, very enjoyed to talk a lot.
Awesome. Okay. Well, as always, friends, that's the top of our episode. If you have feedback or ideas, please hit me up at alexandra@naavik.co. I'm always open. And with that, we're out. I will see you next time. Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@naavik.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Naavik has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.naavik.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Naavik Digest, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.naavik.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.